First of all, a rezoning can come from the elected officials, can come from the Planning Commission, can come from landowners. They can all propose changes in the zoning, and you can propose to change the use. You can propose to change the density that you're allowed on a property. But when the Planning Commission hears a rezoning proposal, they are supposed to make a recommendation to the elected officials who make the final decision whether to approve this rezoning or not. And the Planning Commission is supposed to make what are called findings of fact. They're supposed to give written reasons for their recommendation. And I mentioned a Florida example here that I found where a woman, a horse owner, found that the Planning Commission had not made findings of fact, and she actually did go to the state of Florida and say, hey, something is wrong here. We needed to have reasons why this rezoning was recommended. And the state said, you know, you're absolutely right. So she really did her homework and really did, I think, a very good job of keeping the Planning Commission and the elected officials honest. If you don't make findings of fact, it's a violation of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says elected officials cannot make arbitrary and capricious decisions. In other words, they can't say, well, we're just going to prove this, and not give any reason why they're approving something. Or they can't say, we're going to deny this, and not give any reason why they're denying it either. There's a famous case in Iowa where elected officials couldn't make up their minds, and so what they did is they flipped a coin to make their decision. That didn't go over well in court. I can assure you that wasn't the way to make decisions, flipping the coin. A variance is another way to make changes to the zoning ordinance, and first of all, the elected officials need to appoint what's called a zoning board of adjustment, or sometimes just called the zoning board. And the zoning board is kind of a curious animal that created way back in the 20s, because the zoning board makes a binding decision. They're not making a recommendation to the elected officials. They're making a legally binding decision. So if you want to challenge the decision of a zoning board, you have to take them to a court of appeals. Okay? So what happens is many developers prefer to go through the zoning board rather than go through a rezoning. Okay? So you really have to pay attention, because it's easier for them to get a change in the use, what's called a use variance, by going through the zoning board than to get approval for a change in use through a rezoning. I know it sounds like a subtle difference, but it's often really quite a bit bigger than that. The other kind of variance is called a physical variance, and that has to deal with the limitations of your property just because of the way you bought your property, or the way the property was when you bought it. And let me give you a quick example of that. One of my neighbors, when I lived in New York, wanted to extend his deck 3 feet into the setback. The setback was 15 feet, and he wanted to build 3 feet into the setback. So as a neighbor, I received a notice that my neighbor was wanting to do this. And you have to understand, my neighbor was the wholesaler for all the candy in Greater Albany, New York. And I can't oppose somebody like that. I just said, and plus 3 feet into, the setback wasn't going to reduce my property value or reduce my enjoyment of my property. And I said, sure, fine, that's not a problem. But if he had tried to change the use of his property from a house to a candy warehouse, I might have gotten a little more upset about that.